Welcome everybody to our sound for video session. Today's the 22nd of November. Thank you for joining us. I want to, we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later, but we are on the edge of technical disaster here, potentially, as my technical director shakes her head and says no. What I want to do is let's go ahead and look through our agenda really quickly, and then we've got some great things to cover, including some questions that some of you submitted ahead of time. So let's go ahead and jump into the agenda and see what we've got to cover today. First of all, if you were not already aware, DEITY does have a new contest that they just announced, and it's kind of made me laugh a little bit. So one of the things in the film industry, if you weren't aware of this term already, is the Welhelm Scream. And the Welhelm Scream was a sound effect it's part of the Warner Brothers kind of sound library, which has been used a ton in a variety of different movies over the years. It was a scream that was actually originally recorded in the early 50s, I believe. And it fit, I think it was actually named in the second movie it was used in, which was a Western, and there was a character by the name of Wilhelm, and at one point I think he got shot with an arrow in the leg and he screamed, and that was the Wilhelm Scream. But it probably fit in that circumstance, but it doesn't fit everywhere else, but it's used in a ton of movies. And I think in some respects, my understanding of the history is that Ben Bird actually gave it the name Wilhelm Scream, and that's why it got named for the second movie it was used in as opposed to the first movie, because he wasn't aware of the first movie. But and then he and some friends started kind of using that as a joke in a bunch of movies. And so it's been used in a lot of the Pixar movies. It's been used in the Star Wars movies. It's been used in a ton of movies over the years. And it's kind of it's a fairly melodramatic scream, but in any case, what DEITY has done is they have a new contest, and your task in the contest is to create a new scream that can be used in Hollywood, and they'll choose their favorite, and I think there's a prize of a microphone of some sort. So I put a link down below if you're interested in taking a look at that. You can certainly do that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We do have what I'm excited about, another session coming up this coming Wednesday, and it should be at 5:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, U.S., so that's UTC -7. We're going to interview Mr. Watson Wu. Watson is a person who he's a recordist and a sound designer. He's recorded a ton of really great sound effects for movies, primarily with a focus on autos, vehicles, and he also does a lot of firearms. But his recordings have been used in a ton of movies, most notably Baby Driver. If you haven't seen that, you'll definitely hear some of his car recordings in there. But he also does a lot of recordings for video games as well. So that's going to be over on the main channel, so Curtis Judd as opposed to this channel. And that'll be this coming Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. U.S. Mountain Time, UTC -7. So if you're interested in sound effects, recording, and sound design, I think you're definitely going to want to check that out. All right. I think it's time for the question and answer. So let's jump into our Q&A. All right. We have a problem here. Here's our first technical problem of the day. I'll describe what's going on here in just a minute, but we're just kind of dealing with some technical challenges on this side.
I have no mouse control in this. I'm going to have to escape.
Okay. All right. So we are learning some things here, some lessons the hard way. I'm going to go ahead and do my best to read this to you here, and then we'll talk about this more in a minute. Let's get to the questions. First up from Dick, has a use case. I want to run a half-day virtual event to YouTube for a client, so I assume a live stream of some sort. That client have different remote guests that do a presentation by Teams or Zoom. Not all guests are present at the same time, and before they give the presentation, we must check the video and also the audio levels so that when they must go on, that is right. Also, if they have some questions, I must speak to them without interference, the main presentation running with Zoom or Teams from the other presenter. So I must have a virtual IFB system or something else running between me and all of the guests. Do you know what are the options and how do you or other people in the community deal with this kind of situation so I can produce a smooth virtual event? This is a really this is a challenging one, Dick, and I have a little bit of experience, but not to the extent that you seem. I haven't had multiple guests. I've just had a single guest. So most of the platforms allow you to go into a green room first, and in the green room you're essentially offline, but you can talk to each other. And usually there are audio meters and things like that. So this is the case for StreamYard. It is the case for Riverside.fm. It is the case for Ecamm has this new interview feature. It also has a green room. So those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. What I don't know is how it works when you have, I imagine it works the same as, I assume that what would happen is you would use some platform like that, like StreamYard. You would be in the green room the entire time, and as the people join, you would be able to talk to them and get things going. But I don't know if StreamYard is sophisticated enough to be able to mute it so that the people who are currently on air, while you're prepping the new person, while the other people that are on air, they shouldn't be hearing you because you're just going to be distracting them. So you're going to want to look at those different platforms and see. Now, in the bigger productions, what they're typically doing is they are doing that all, instead of using some sort of online platform to do that, they're doing that in a more kind of a localized environment where they have more control. So they have actual IFBs a lot of times, like literal, they have in-ear monitors, they have an IFB system. So if they have field reporters, for example, they can actually hear the broadcast. So they wait there to speak, to report until they get a cue in their IFB from the broadcast. So anyways, there are some thoughts there. I don't know if anyone else has more experience doing the bigger jobs. I know, for example, a couple of presentations I've watched recently, there was a sound summit where they did something like that. You might want to contact Sound Devices and see if they have anything they can tell you. Also, True Audio did one recently. Thomas Pop was the host of that one. That one was, technically, they had a lot of problems. And I don't know what they were using in that particular case. I think they were using OBS. And they had a lot of challenges with that. So if you want to contact Thomas Pop, he might have some additional information there as well. He goes by Video Mantis on YouTube. And I think his website's also Video Mantis for Thomas Pop. So you might contact him and see if he has any insights on how to do that. But those are kind of the thoughts I have. So if anyone else in the chat here, if you have other insights or ideas or experience you can share, definitely please share that with Dick. All right, Dick, thanks for the question. Okay, so here are our technical challenges. Next up from Jason, I saw your live stream setup video that you ran an XLR cable from the MixPre to your C200. I have a GH5. Do I just need to run a 3.5 millimeter cable from the MixPre to mic jack and change the settings on the GH5 to line level? I'll pause there. That's the first question. So Jason, it depends if you have the GH5 or the GH5S. The GH5 does not have the ability to go to line level. So what you would do in that case is, yes, you'd use the 3.5 millimeter output on your MixPre. And then you'd run that into the 3.5 millimeter input on the GH5. You would then reduce the input level on the GH5 to its lowest setting, which is minus 12 dB. And then you would send tone at minus 20 dB from the MixPre and adjust the output fader on the MixPre until the meters on the camera show up at minus 20 or whatever level you choose. I would generally go for minus 20, but that is how you would do that on the GH5. Now, if you do have the GH5S, you can switch it to line level. In that case, you basically do the same thing, except you probably won't have to attenuate the level much or maybe even any. So set it to line level on the GH5, leave your output fader on the MixPre at 0. Send tone at minus 20 dB. It should line up on the meter on the camera. The audio meter on the camera should also line up at minus 20. If it doesn't, and you need to attenuate some, just use the output fader on the MixPre to get it so that it's at the same level on the MixPre and at the camera. So that's how you do that. Also, second question, when I crank up the MixPre 3.2 to 65 to 67 dB to drive the SM7B, I hear a lot of sizzle S, which I am guessing is a room noise and not the preamps. I'm not sure if you're talking about sibilance there or if you're talking about, like fans and stuff in the room. But in either case, there are ways you can tackle this. You can use a high-pass filter. That'll help a little bit. So I would set a high-pass filter and kind of sweep that up a little bit. Maybe, use your ears to hear what it sounds like, but maybe up into the 70, maybe even 80, depending on how deep the voice is of the person you're recording or streaming with. That's one thing you can do. You're using a mix pre, so you don't have a noise gate. I'm trying to remember. We don't have EQ on a mix pre. In any case, if you do have any of those on another mixer, you can do that as well. So our technical director is detecting a noise here. Do we have a noise problem?
I don't know.
Okay. How's the noise? How's the noise sound? How's the sound out on the stream? Let us know. Love to hear and just make sure that we're sounding okay. All right. I think we got Jason's questions. Let's head on over to the next one. I have a Rodecaster Pro. This is from Ricardo. I have a Rodecaster Pro and use it with Ecamm for live streams. Even with my mute button on, I get an echo feedback in my recordings and live stream. Why? I actually sent a note back to Ricardo to ask for a little clarification on how things are set up, and I haven't heard back yet, unless he just emailed me right before we started. But Ricardo, if you could give us a little bit more information, we should be able to help in terms of, getting you set straight. I don't know if you're running the audio from the Rodecaster directly into the ATEM, or actually, oh, you don't even say you're using an ATEM, and so I don't know how you have everything connected to each other. If you're running audio from the Rodecaster to your camera, or if you have the Rodecaster connected via USB to your computer, and are you using, do you have remote guests coming in? So there's just a lot of things that we need to know in terms of additional information to kind of get that sorted. But if you send over some additional notes, we'll take another shot at it. So thanks for that, Ricardo. All right, next up from Celeste. No matter what the environment may be, the Sennheiser G4 wireless transmitter with stock lavalier, Countryman B3 or B6, and receiver have very inconsistent connections. One moment it's working great, and another moment there is interference noise, etc. I reset the frequencies when changing areas. Many other have experienced this issue, but the overall resolution is always to purchase something better, like Lectrosonics. That's one solution, but I don't think it's the only solution. This is the only wireless I own, but I just don't have confidence in their stability while on a gig. Also, for the price point, I feel I have to do too much troubleshooting. Many times there is enough intermittent interference that makes the audio unusable, and I can only rely on the boom mic. Are there some settings that I'm missing? Do you have any recommendations? All right. Okay. Thanks for the feedback also on the how the sound is sounding. We'll come back to that in just a minute here. So as far as the G4 system, I think, Celeste, it really depends. I think if you have the G4, the 100 series, those are really kind of made to have one or two channels at most. And I put a link in the description down below where there's a video put together by one of my friends, Guy Cochran, who actually runs the DVE store. He has a little tutorial. One of the things you'll want to pay close attention to is potentially squelch. The squelch setting might be able to help you in those circumstances where you're getting that funky noise. So go ahead and follow the instructions. I assume you're already doing a scan and you're choosing frequencies and so on and so forth. Also, if you are using more than 2 channels, you might want to also check out our live sound for video session from last week. In that, we talked about intermodulation. So if you are using 3 channels or more, there are definitely some things you need to take into account there that could help clean things up. So those are my thoughts on that. Hopefully that helps a little bit. Lectrosonics, yeah, they're great systems, but it's not the only solution. But if you are using more, I think with a G4 100 series, I probably wouldn't try to run more than 2 channels of that. If you are trying to run more than 2 channels of that, it's probably time to look at other systems that are kind of a better set. Well, I don't know. Maybe I might be out of line for saying that. I'm sorry. But definitely take advantage of the information in that video from Guy and also last week's Sound for Video session. It talked about intermodulation. All right. Next up from Rob. I am going to enter DEITY's Replace the Welhelm Scream contest for tomorrow's session. I'd love to hear what you and your soundies have to say about recording screams. Excuse me. FYI, I'm throwing my entire mic locker, such that it is, at this project. My Rode NT1 and Pod mic, my Curtis Judd Commemorative Edition Stellar X2. There's a story behind that. And an old Sony short shotgun mic I have kicking around. And of course, the DEITY Vlov I won in a previous contest. I've figured out how I can record all 5 tracks separately. Then I'll mix them in post if one isn't the obvious best choice. Okay. All right. Let's talk about a few things here. So as far as the microphones, I think that's a fine idea. I think that one thing, depending on what you're trying to go for, the Welhelm Scream, for those that haven't heard it, is actually fairly high-pitched, and it seems to, I think it might have a few layers to it. So one thing I might suggest, Rob, is I might actually consider experimenting with layering the sound. So you might do multiple takes and, modulate your voice in different ways. And you might be able to mix them together to make something that's a little bit more interesting. So those are my thoughts initially. I think different mics are a good idea to really kind of experiment and see which of them is going to capture what you're trying to achieve, or, just experimenting with them and see what you get there. So, yeah, Peter is asking about which camera we're using. We're going to come back to that. We do have a behind the scenes that we're going to talk about today. There is a reason why things are looking a little sharper today, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But hopefully, Rob, that gives you some background information. And if other people, again, in the chat, definitely sound off if you've got other suggestions for Rob too. Let's try and help Rob win that new D3 Pro microphone, which I believe they're giving away. All right, I think this is our final question. What would you use as a non-aggressive declicking strategy for your entire track? Let me give you a little background information. This is my friend Samuel. Samuel is based, he's in Italy, and he and I did a podcast, a video podcast some time ago. I put a link for that in the description if you'd like to take a look at that. We talked about how to improve the audio and video quality of your podcast used in the more general sense, here mostly meaning also video. But what he says is, I'm currently doing that surgically, referring to declicking, whenever I see clicks, but that's time consuming. I used to do that on the entire track, but I figured out it was degrading my own voice. I actually did that in our remote podcast, the one that I just referred to, link in the description. And the result in my voice was a crackling sound. So yeah, Samuel, I would avoid doing a global declicking run, or running, your entire audio clip or timeline through a declicking plugin. I think the problem with that is that it's going to attack things that it shouldn't be. So, you're going to want to just apply here. Well, let me explain what I do. And again, if others have some, input on what they do that works, even if it is on a global basis, let us know in the chat for sure. But what I do, I actually don't do that during my at least for my YouTube videos. I don't do that in my audio editing app anymore. What I do is I just watch for the clicks that occur while I'm doing the edit. And what I do in the video edit, I actually make a cut right around the click, right before it and right after it. And I drop the isotope declick plugin on there, and it just takes care of that one. So I'm just tackling the ones that are really noticeable. There are going to be little ones here and there still, but for the most part, I'm just tackling those that are, the most noticeable. That's how I approach it. And usually for most videos that I do, I only end up doing 1 or 2, maybe 3 of those. So that's how I do it. So, okay, let's head back on over to the chat. So let's talk about things in the chat a little bit here. Actually, let's go to Ken's comment here first. Ken just said something interesting here. Thank you, Ken. I don't have that much experience. I've never actually used the G4 system. I did use the G3 before, just 2 channels whenever I used it, so I didn't have experience. But Ken does say that the G4 100 system can easily get 12 channels in a clean spectrum. You cannot just change the frequencies without scanning for new frequencies first. So I think that's definitely some good advice there. So it shouldn't be a limitation on the wireless system itself. But again, from what you were saying, Celeste, I almost get the sense that maybe the squelch setting needs to be set, and you also need to, you're going to want to be very careful and get some practice at using that scan feature. It sounds like probably you already are. But again, we need a little bit more information on how many channels you're using and kind of what you're running up against. So thanks for that, Ken. Appreciate the confirmation there. All right, Brian had a good question as well. We'll just tackle that really quickly here. I'd like to know if you know how I can adjust the mic level on the Wireless Go using an attenuator with a lav mic, and then a follow-up there. I wanted to improve the Wireless Go. I was hoping to use an on-body attenuator in between the lav and the wireless unit before it goes to the receiver. Ooh. Well, I'd like to experiment with the Wireless Go and the lav mic, but an attenuator for singing recordings. Okay, so what it's sounding like is you're probably overloading the transmitter because the singer is quite loud. I've never used an attenuator on a mic like that, an inline attenuator. But yeah, if you could get a 10 dB pad, that might well fit the bill there. I thought you were talking about an attenuator between the receiver and the camera. But if you can find a 3.5 millimeter 10 dB pad or something like that, that could probably help for the singing. So cool. I see, Adrian says, I see that the audio limited A10 can only make 44.1 in AES. It should be a problem to use it with an 888 and 48 kilohertz, isn't it? I have not found it to be a problem. And I don't know exactly where in the signal chain it is doing any sort of resampling, but somewhere in there it seems to be doing some resampling. So it transmits in 44.1, but I'm doing my recordings in 48 kilohertz, and I'm getting good results. So it's probably resampling somewhere in there. And I haven't had any problems with it. Haven't had any complaints that it doesn't sound good, that it sounds processed, or any of that. So, all right, Alan asks, anyone got an opinion of those portable vocal booth reflectors like the RA or SC Electronics? And I assume, Alan, you're talking about they kind of pitch them for recording vocals for music in untreated spaces or voiceover. And they're kind of these reflection filters that go just around the microphone like this, so some absorptive material that fits behind it. My brother has used one for some of his vocals. I've heard Mike Delgadio did a review of one. I think it was the SE Electronics one that he did. And he wasn't too impressed. He felt like it wasn't, it probably helped a little bit, but it wasn't attenuating the audio from the right direction. He felt like you needed more behind you than you needed in front of you. But I don't know. I'm curious what other people say. There is another one, a company, I think it was a Swiss company that I had talked to about potentially doing a review. We didn't end up doing it just because they wanted to kind of maintain some editorial control over the final video I put out, which just not how I work. And I still respect them, and that's fine if they want to work that way. But their product looked pretty good. It was one that basically it fits over your entire head. So that one, probably not for those that are in, that get a little claustrophobic, but in terms of efficacy, it seemed like it worked pretty well based on the samples I had heard. So that one's a little bit different and definitely more expensive. I think you're looking at, it comes with a pretty hefty stand, and I think it was a little north of $1,000. But if you needed to keep things small and be able to travel and or just work in a very small space, even at home, that seemed one that would work pretty nicely. Curtis, can you use your influence with sound devices to get them to add 88.2 kilohertz as a sample rate to the mix pre? I don't know that they would listen to me. I'm happy to pass that on, but I'm curious what your goal is with using 88.2 kilohertz. So that's double 44.1, but I'm curious what the circumstances are under which you would like to use that, just out of curiosity. Pete asks, are you doing anything for de-essing on this stream? A little bit. I am using, I wonder if it's time. Shall we switch over? Let's come back to your question, Pete. I am using the Shelford channel, and we'll cover that in just a few minutes here. Let's bring up Boulder Surfer's comment. Yes, Boulder Surfer, yes, the music was intentionally lower than my voice. Maybe I went a little too low. I'm just kind of trying to put that there as sort of background music. So that was the idea there. We can pull it up a little bit. That's part of the problem we have with our current setup that we'll talk about again in just a minute. All right. What do we have next? Sound is good, and the video looks very well focused today. Which camera are you using? Let's take some guesses on that. Who said? Daniel said C200. There's one guess. Ono Coffee says C200 question mark. Techno Channel 33 S3C 4K3. Go ahead and put that up. C300 maybe. Okay, good guess. Is it the C70? Oh, I'm sorry. Samuel is in Cambridge. My apologies. Somehow I thought you were in Italy. My mistake. All right. Let's see. So we have all the guesses. We are on the Canon C200. Nothing has changed on the camera side. What has changed today is that this is the first stream that we have ever done in 4K. So I don't know if you're seeing the 4K or even if you're seeing the HD, it's downsampling from 4K. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So we're doing this not because anyone needs to see my face in higher resolution, because nobody does. But what we are doing is we're experimenting with some new hardware here, and that's why I warned that we could have a technical disaster on our hands. Because I would like to be able to do more software demonstrations in the live streams, and I really feel like 4K actually could help in those circumstances for those that are watching on monitors that could support that. So that's the thinking here. So we're actually using a 4K switcher. And let's actually get a behind the scenes look here really quickly, just so you can see our setup. So there's a camera behind me. You can see here's our technical director right here. We are using an ATEM 2ME switcher, 4K switcher. And Emma is controlling that with the software, the ATEM software control right here. This is the Canon C200, which is our main camera right now. This is a GH5 back up here. And so let me just kind of talk through the setup here just a little bit. Here's our sad little ATEM Mini Pro right here, which is not being used today. So let's talk about a few things. So first of all, audio. Somebody was asking if we're doing any de-essing today. We are doing a tiny bit of de-essing, just basically EQ. We have a little bit of a high shelf and we're pulling down because my voice has a lot of sibilance in it. We could probably go even harder if we wanted to, but we're not. So that's something we've talked about a little bit in the past. This is doing a few things. So we do have a little bit of EQ and we have a compressor here as well. And then this audio from the Shelford channel is coming down into the Apollo, Universal Audio Apollo. And then that's going line out to the camera. So that's what you're hearing right now. We'll probably adjust this overall setup at some point in the future. I'd like to have a mixer of some sort. So that we can control our different inputs here and be able to pipe the audio in. The audio, or the music in, excuse me. The music actually came in via Ecamm Live, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So that's the camera signal chain, and then the camera goes, of course, via HDMI to the switcher, which is in a closet over here. You can see right over here, this is our multi-view monitor over here. So this is what Emma is using as her monitor to see where we're at. On the right-hand side at the top is the program view. This is preview. So right now we're just running two cameras into the switcher. A very simple setup as far as switching is concerned. And then everything else we're doing on the computer through Ecamm Live. So here's the thing with a big switcher like that. You're on your own to do everything. This really kind of underscores why the ATEM Mini is such an amazing little device. This little guy here can do so much stuff. It has 4 HDMI inputs, but those HDMI inputs are not just HDMI inputs. They're actually scalers and frame rate converters as well. On the big switchers, you're on your own to do that stuff. So you have to feed everything into the switcher at the same resolution and the same frame rate. Otherwise, it just doesn't recognize them. And so, we're talking about a $4,000 switcher. Plus, if you need to add a scaler or a frame rate converter, you're looking at another several $100s per channel. So it's a really expensive proposition at some point. That's part of what makes this ATEM Mini so impressive. Now, granted, this is only HD, which is fine for live streaming in the majority of cases. But then all of the other features that come along with this are just so super. I mean, I'm just in awe of what they accomplished with this little device here. So for $300 for the entry-level version, up to $900 for the ISO version, $600 for the mid-range version. You can do so much. Oh, and the Pro and the ISO also have encoders, hardware encoders built into them, which is just like, most hardware encoders, even just HD hardware encoders, you're looking at, and I'm not talking about the little converters that you plug in like an HD camera into, and they go USB into your computer. I'm talking about something that via Ethernet can stream to the internet. That's what I'm talking about. Those are usually at least $1,000. So anyway, that also, the switcher doesn't, the ATEM 2ME does not have that. You have to have a separate encoder as well. So it's the ATEM Mini is really an amazing thing. And I've heard a few people complain, and I think they're coming from the consumer electronics point of view, that the ATEM Mini is just too expensive. And I'm just like, you have no idea. You have no idea how amazing that device is for its price. So, all right, what else can we talk about on the setup here? One second, I need to clear my throat. Let us know if you have any questions about the setup here. We have a lot of time. We are running ahead today. Awesome, very, very efficient. Let's go ahead and take some questions from Jonas Entertainment, looks like. All right, if I want to hop a camera from a MixPre 6 wirelessly, do I have to use two wireless systems since my receiver will be on camera and transmitter on mixer? Well, you'll just use one kit. So you'll use one channel, which includes a transmitter and receiver, but you just need one channel to send a hop. Well, unless you want to do a stereo hop. If you're just sending mono, you can get away with one kit. If you are going to do stereo, then yes, you'll need two. So, all right, Marshall, do you know if standalone retaining material for an internal coiled boom pole cable similar to the RSS boom poles come with? They actually just use little pieces of plastic. It's fairly pliable plastic. I actually went to their factory and saw that. I don't know of like any specific product that's built for that purpose. You could potentially use even something like, the first thought that comes to my mind is you could use something like moleskin. So just over the counter at a drugstore, the moleskin that's used for sores on your feet and stuff like that. You might be able to get away with something like that. And in fact, it might, the challenge is when you extend the pole, that's when things become tricky. And then you collapse it, especially when you're collapsing, to be honest. But no, I don't know specifically of any material. It's just my impression, though, it was just kind of a very pliable plastic material that would just, all it was doing was holding the cable, suspending it a little bit so that it wouldn't slap against the side of the boom pole. But I don't know of any particular product that does that. All right. Do you use any audio effects during your live, like a compressor equalizer? Yes. We're using both an equalizer and a compressor today. And I typically do. You can also do something like that in the ATEM Mini. That's another thing that makes the ATEM Mini so amazing, is it does have all those processors built in. So you've got a noise gate, you've got an EQ, you have a limiter, you have a compressor. Now the limiter, I believe, is digital, but nevertheless, it has all of those effects, and you can do that right in there. And typically, before I had the Shelford channel, yes, I was doing some of that either in the ATEM, or I was at least using a limiter in the MixPre. So definitely, I think that's actually pretty important for live streaming. I think you do need to do, ideally, just a little bit to sweeten the audio, make it pretty consistent. So. All right, from Norlis, has anyone had much of a play with DaVinci Resolve 17 yet? If so, how's Fairlight shaping up? We talked a touch about that last week. I have not installed it yet because I'm just time-wise haven't had an opportunity yet. But in terms of I just got distracted because I was reading comments there. Sorry. In terms of new features, it looks really interesting. So I'm excited to get to work with it when I have an opportunity. But curious what other people's experience has been so far. Camerahead Studios says, have you heard anything about when DEITY is going to come out with their BPTRX? I haven't. I'm looking forward to that one as well. I'm assuming that, and it seems like this has affected a lot of product companies. I'm still waiting for the Canon C70 to show up. But I think a lot of manufacturing has slowed down pretty substantially with the pandemic. So haven't heard any updates on that. Hopefully soon. All right. Oh, okay. Here's a clarification on the 88.2 kilohertz. A very trivial reason, actually. In the past, I used Vinyl Studio and an Audient ID4 to digitize records and would like to do the same with my MixPre 6.2. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, totally makes sense. I'll mention it to Paul next time I talk to him. It may be a hardware limitation. I don't know. We'll see. Antonio, problems with a Scream contest will be to prevent a neighbor calling the police or ambulance during the recording takes. Be careful out there, people. Recording a Scream can be very dangerous. You might want to let your neighbors know ahead of time, especially if you're in an apartment or something like that. Daniel asks, what lens are you using on the C200? Today, that is the 24-105 f4L. So just a good old-fashioned Canon zoom lens on there. All right, got a super chat from Rob. Thank you, Rob. Best wishes on your Scream. I hope it comes out well. I'm expecting, Rob, that you will include some falsetto layering in there as well. And I think the falsetto layering would work best on the Stellar X2 commemorative Curtis Judd edition. And there's an inside joke there. Rob actually bought the Stellar X2 from me, and he insisted that before I send it that I sign it. So I signed it with a Sharpie, and I think he's used it once since then. I guess it didn't turn out to be so awesome after all for his voice, or maybe, I don't know. Okay. Okay. Hi there. Does anybody know if I'm understanding correctly that DaVinci 17 can do clip aligning according to timecode, similar to as the Tentacle Studio app does? I believe it does. From my experience, it does have a new feature that I haven't explored a whole lot. I've used it once to update the DaVinci Resolve course that we have. It has a new sync bin, and I've had kind of mixed results with the sync bin. Hopefully, that will improve here, or maybe it's improved in 17. But yeah, it should be able to lay things out just like Tentacle Studio does, I believe. Zach asks, which light panel is that? That is a D&O 180W with a softbox on it. We can switch back over to that camera real quick here. There we go. Yeah, so this right here is the softbox, and it's an LED panel that sits behind there. The reason I use that back there, as opposed to something like an aperture, well, first of all, this has no fan. Yay, good for no fan, especially when you're live streaming. That's just more noise introduced to the room. But the other reason I use it is that you can see it's a pretty tight space behind the desk there. So there's a window back there, and we don't have a lot of space. So that's why we're using that. And it works nicely. Also, you can't see it, but behind me over here, just to bring the ambiance level in the room up to a reasonable level, we're using a Lupo Super Panel 30. That's pointed up at the ceiling, just to bring the ambience level up a little bit. All right. Let's see, Jason. Jason says, thanks for your ATEM audio for live streaming course to help me solve and prevent some big problems. Excellent. So glad to hear it, Jason. Thanks for that. And thanks for the super chat as well. Appreciate that. All right. I have a question. I'm using a Comica radio system. Should I mod the aerial to SMA and go into a PSC for funsies? 350 pounds per kit. 2 TC 1 RD dual channel. So cheap enough to get wrong. It sounds to me like Techno Channel 33S 3C 4K3 needs a project, and I would highly, highly recommend that you go forward with that plan. I support it. Thank you so much, Samuel, for the super chat. Appreciate that. Greg asks, given the capabilities of the A10, are you doing wireless booming? I am Not yet, just because I'll probably start experimenting with that here now that I have all 4 channels. But I haven't on any productions yet. I'm laying low for the rest of this year, so I haven't done a production since February, I think it was, like early February. But yeah, definitely, that's part of the reason I moved up to 4 channels, is so that I could boom one of them. That's definitely the plan. All right, Jason, thank you for answering my questions. I just purchased your Mix Pre course. Can you please explain the differences, the different frequencies on the low cut filter? Yes. So the low cut is useful for getting rid of low frequency energy that just isn't contributing to usually the dialogue that I'm recording. So usually, I think for men's voices, you can usually set that up to about, I find that for most men's voices, you can set that up to about 70 hertz. If you start going higher than that, definitely keep your headphones on and listen and check to make sure that you're not cutting into their voices if you want to retain all of that. But typically, for most productions, I'll generally have that high pass filter on somewhere in the 60 to 70 hertz range. For women's voices, you can typically go a bit higher than that, and I've found a lot of times I can go to 120 hertz without really cutting into their voice a whole lot. So I can get a little bit more aggressive in terms of getting rid of any sort of, that'll help with the fan noise or air conditioning or heating noise that's in the room, things like that. So that's generally how I approach the high-pass filter, Jason. Hopefully that helps there. All right, Mark. My wife runs online art classes using a camera facing her and then one pointing down at what she is drawing. We are looking to buy the F8N or the F6, but I wondered what studio mic would be best. Whew. Well, I think, Mark, that's going to depend on a few things. I did a video on my main channel. If you do a search on YouTube for Curtis Judd Livestream microphone position, you'll find a video where we demonstrated the different types of microphones that you can use during a live stream and kind of the pros and cons of each. So that would be something worth having a listen to. Part of it depends on how much she'll be moving around. If she's not moving much, if she's really staying in one place, you could probably get away with, well, here, for example, I'm using a microphone that's just on a boom arm. If we can switch to the other camera here real quick. Let me just show you what this looks like and see if you can see it here. So that's a stand that is attached to the edge of the desk, and I can move it around a little bit. But the nice thing about it, if we switch back to the main cam here, you'll see it's not super imposing. In fact, if we drop Mark's comment here, there we go. Okay, so you can see it is in the frame, but it's not particularly prominent. The nice thing about that is that this is going to be one of the better ways to keep, to optimize your sound signal to noise ratio. So you're getting more of the vocals, the dialogue that you're trying to record, and you're not going to get too much of the room sound. So that's one way to do it. You can boom a microphone up above that'll be out of the way of the overhead camera that she's using. The trick is that as soon as you start moving the mic farther away, you have to be cognizant of some things. Number one, she's going to have a desk, I'm assuming, or an easel of some sort. Probably it sounds like a desk. She's going to have a computer screen, most likely. All of those flat surfaces that are nearby are going to reflect sound. And so as soon as you move a mic farther away, some of that reflected sound is generally going to find its way into the microphone. So it's going to affect the quality of the sound a little bit. Lavalier microphones, if you're not working next to really, a lot of large reflective surfaces, I would, generally I find that can work fine. If you are working near a bunch of reflective surfaces, though, I find that a lavalier just picks up a lot of that, and it just generally doesn't sound great. So it really just depends on the exact setup that you're working with. But I would go with something like this if you can. My second choice would be a boom mic, just boomed out of the frame a little bit. But it has to be positioned such that if she's looking down while she's doing the art on the overhead camera, that it's still going to pick her up. So you're going to have to kind of tune where you place the microphone a little bit. But hopefully that gives you some thoughts on where to go. All right. Zlatko asks, hello and greetings from Bulgaria. Did you try Zoom F6 and Atomos Atom X Bluetooth timecode sync? I don't have the Ninja 5, and so I have not tried the Atom X yet. But it looks like a pretty intriguing little system. I'm really It's interesting that Atomos bought timecode systems, and they did a partnership where they actually worked on the Atom X module that you put on your Ninja 5 HDMI recorder, and then they bought them. They just bought timecode systems altogether. No, I haven't tried it yet, but I'm curious to hear what others will say about that. Oh, okay, Rob. Thank you for the correction. I appreciate that. He says, actually, the X2 has seen a lot of service in my live stream as I've improved sound treatment. Okay, fair enough. I'm glad to hear that the commemorative edition is doing its job. Ken brings up a very brilliant point. Bob Ross used the lavalier mic painting all those happy little trees. So great point. I think with an easel, it's probably... Yeah, just be careful. I'm just trying to warn against people that assume that a lavalier microphone is the number one choice in every circumstance, and it's not. But it can definitely work. So, some good thanks, Ken. And I was very flattered once. Somebody told me that I was the Bob Ross of microphones, and I was absolutely flattered by that. So, thanks for bringing up Bob again. All right, can you please go through the steps on how you usually hop from a mixer to camera wirelessly? Well, yes, let's talk about that. I can talk about it at a high level. Obviously, I can't demonstrate it here. I don't have the setup to do it right now. So the general idea is that you're going to want to do it just like you would do a wired connection to a camera. So the difference is that you're going to have to find a wireless set of frequencies, and you're going to have to get your gain staging right on the wireless system. Ideally, with a wireless system that you're using to send a camera hop, you can switch the wireless system into line level. So you're not doing this funny gain staging where you're gaining up everything, making your mix, and then sending it out at mic level, and then if you use a consumer wireless system, you're going to have to do that. So, the first step is going to be with your output into the transmitter of the wireless system. You're going to need to work out your gain staging there first. So if it's a consumer system, I'm getting distracted by the chat, so sorry about that. If it's a consumer system, it's expecting a microphone level input, and that's the challenge. So what you're going to need to do is I would generally gain down on the transmitter as much as possible, and then get the levels out of your mixer into the transmitter from there. So you're going to have to calibrate those levels. So what you're going to do is send tone from the mixer at minus 20 dB, and then adjust the output or the input on the transmitter down as low as it can go, and then adjust the output fader on the mixer until you get those meters on the transmitter at minus 20 dB. That's the first step. So now you've got your levels set there. Then you will go to the transmitter, or the receiver, excuse me, that you have connected to the camera. Now, it depends on what camera you're using there. If you have a line level output or line level input on the camera, that's the ideal situation. Then you'll set the output on the receiver to line level as well, and then just check your levels again. Make sure that when you send tone from the mixer, you're getting minus 20 on the camera's meters as well. So that's the main approach that I would take. Again, if you're using consumer wireless, it gets a lot more complicated. If you're using a pro level wireless where you can set everything to line level, it just makes that process of calibrating the levels simpler. So that's the general idea. Now, it's possible if your camera does not have a line level input setting, then I would reduce the input level on the camera and adjust the output level on the receiver until, again, you're sending tone from your mixer and the meters on the camera get to minus 20. So that's the general approach. Okay, hope I didn't miss anything there. I think I got it all. All right, Antonio, any reason for you not to broadcast in stereo? Is that a personal preference? Our music actually comes across stereo, I think. I'm pretty sure that the music is coming across stereo, and the dialogue is coming across dual mono. is my understanding. So at least that's what I'm showing, and that's what I've said. So, or found when I've actually watched the streams back. So I think it's actually doing stereo. In the case of the dialogue here, I'm not doing a stereo recording, so I'm just sending it dual mono. So it's the same thing on both channels from this one microphone. Are you considering the new Fairlight desktop mixing console for use with DaVinci 17? I was just wondering how useful they would be. Greg, that's a good question. I don't know if I have space for it. And I don't do a ton of really big post jobs, and so probably for me it's not in the immediate future. But I mean, if you're doing, and a lot of times with the short films, they're the ones at least that I'm working on, certainly the corporate pieces are pretty straightforward, so I don't really need a physical control surface for those. And I also, part of the problem too is I have the problem is that I do have the SQ5, the Allen and Heath SQ5, which I generally will use with Pro Tools, and so it acts as a control surface for that. And so usually that's how I've done it. Maybe that'll change in the future, but it does seem like a neat, I mean, it looks really cool. I'm excited about it. I mean, not that I'm going to buy one, but it's nice to see the progress there. And there's another question about whether anyone has any experience with the editor keyboard or the new speed editor. The speed editor is it's a very kind of retro looking, back from the early days of digital editing, control surface, just a small keyboard basically. Looks kind of interesting. If you're doing a lot of editing, seems like an interesting thing. Mark says, I'm buying your F8N course after our email exchanges, but I'm very new to audio. Do you explain things for dummies? I am the dummy. Well, let's get some input from some other people who have taken some of my courses here. I think yes. I think it is. We try to go through it, as long as you don't skip too many of the segments. I think it's going to have everything you need. And we do our sound for video sessions weekly. So if you have questions, we can run through those. Safe environment here. There's no question too dumb to ask. And also, you can always email me directly if you'd prefer to do that. So any of those ways, Mark, we can get you covered. All right. What is the ideal increments of frequency separation of two different transmitters so they don't cross over each other? That's going to really depend on the wireless system in my experience. Some of them are a little bit more precise than others. And I don't know the specific answer to, it's going to depend, I guess, is a short answer. A lot of the Pro systems, you can pack more channels into a relatively smaller band than others. Usually the manufacturers will specify that. On the consumer systems, they typically don't because they're all just using 2.4 gigahertz. But if you have a UHF system, they should typically say for a given band how many channels you should be able to run in there. And from that, you can do the math and figure out how much you should probably space them apart. What are your favorite closed back headphones? Well, do I get a price limit? If there's no price limit, the very best headphones I have ever heard in the world, ever, on my head, are the Sennheiser, is it HD1, HS1? It's the Orpheus. I went to Germany to Wiedemark, which is where Sennheiser is headquartered, and they had a little listening room set up with their $60,000 headset, and I got a chance to listen to that, and it was breathtaking. It really was good. The headphones are kind of impractical. They're huge. They're like these big rooms that clamp onto the side of your face, but it just sounded heavenly. It was really, really good. Now, on a day-to-day basis, I'm using, just to bring it back to reality here, we're using Bayer Dynamic DT 770 Pros. I like these mainly because they're very comfortable on my head. I'm not sure that I would call them perfectly even or flat. I don't know that they're not that, I don't think, but I'm used to them. I generally know how they respond. And I think that's really the important thing, is to find something that's comfortable, reasonable quality. I like the fact that you can replace the ear pads on there, which I have had to do. I've had these now for over 8 years at least. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on headphones. So that's the Bear Dynamic DT770 Pro. I'm using the 80 ohm version for most circumstances. Okay, what have we got up next here? Is that everything? All right. Ken, so Ken's little picture there, by the way, if you'll notice here, he's got his head in between these special hearing amplifiers. That's kind of what it feels like to wear those Sennheiser headphones that I was talking about. Feels a little bit like that, but again, the experience is quite amazing. And Emma needs to get Curtis a Bob Ross wig for his next shotgun mic demo. Be careful, we might do that. And the shirt with the big collars. I'm not quite as hairy as Bob was, but I'm not sure I can pull that off. All right. Oh, okay. Peter suggests you need the Rolls MS 111 that Caleb suggested for cough muting. That's a good idea. So I think that's a little it's a little device that you put in your signal chain that allows you to basically just very quickly mute. That was back when I had to clear my Utah. I'm not going there. Sorry. The technical director is shaking her head. No. All right. We're just combing the chat here. Make sure we got everything covered. Norlist, how much does Emma charge you per stream? She's actually paid on an hourly basis on a contract. She's a contract worker. And do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Why would I want to talk about that?
She doesn't really want to talk about. She's asking why she would want to talk about that. But she does get paid on an hourly basis for not only this, but also for any of the other work that she does for. She helps shoot most of the main storyline for the videos we put on the other channel. And when we work on courses, she does a lot of the editing there as well. All right. Antonio has a follow-up here. Sorry, my question was not well formulated earlier. My question was focusing on the voice capture using one microphone in dual mono instead of using two microphones. Or even using a stereo mic. Can you try one day? That would be interesting to hear. We will certainly try one day. The problem with stereo miking, just for dialogue for this kind of format, is that typically you'll want to move back a little farther to get a stereo image, and therefore you're going to pick up more room, so more ambiance. Not usually the kind of thing you're looking for in this kind of scenario or this format, but yeah, definitely stereo recording is exciting and interesting and definitely has its places. I think when you're doing ambiances and things like that, that's where it makes most sense. But typically for dialogue, I generally don't. At least I'm almost always recording mono for that. But yes, I can try someday. I have another question. When do you think we should go to cart systems? Well, if you have a back problem, that's a good reason to go to a cart. I just bought my first cart and used it on one production right before the pandemic started. And that's all my experience with it so far. In my circumstances, what usually happens, and the reason I've gone to it just to kind of a very basic cart. So I have a cart by a company called SoundCart, and it's the SoundCart Mini. I think that's what it's called, or the Mini SoundCart. The name of the company is SoundCart. The name of the product is SoundCart Mini or Mini Sound. I don't remember, but anyway, it's just very small. So basically what it's made to do is to put a bag on the sound cart. You actually can put rack mount gear on there if you wanted to. You can adapt it for that. It's a little bit overkill because it's such a small cart. But what I do is, since I'm booming, in most cases I'm booming as well as mixing, and I'm not usually, for most of the productions I'm working on, it's not really important to deliver a mix. We're mostly just recording ISOs, and we do all the mix and post. So that's kind of my thought there. And the reason I went with a cart was because in a lot of the short films that I work on, it's really pretty straightforward. Like the sets are open enough where I can just keep, instead of having to wear that bag all day long plus boom, I can just towed around the cart and just roll it up to the next scene. Usually there's plenty of space. I can leave it a little farther back so I'm not in the way of the lighting design. And that works pretty well for what we're doing. And so that just takes a lot of the stress off. So honestly, one of them is if you have back problems, it's a good time maybe to invest in a small cart like that. It is a very physical job to be the one-man band where you've got the harness, you've got the bag, or worse, you've got just the shoulder strap for the bag. That's even harder from my standpoint. It gives you more flexibility, but man, it's just a lot of weight that you're carrying around on your back and your shoulder all day long. Now, obviously, there are times I still have my harness and I've got my smaller bag if I need it as well, where I can put the mix pre in there and go smaller. But there have been some circumstances where bringing a cart would have been a little bit of a challenge. We hiked up into the woods. And anyway, there's some thoughts there on sound carts and when to move to them. All right. How are we on time? We're out of time? Can we answer one more question? Well, let's just finish up this wireless one. So, okay, so here, let's say by Electrosonics transmitter. Should I purchase one at 470 to 495 and the other at 486 to 511, or can I just buy two of the same frequency block at 470 to 495? Yeah, you can definitely get two channels within 470 to 495. But what I did with my A10 system is that the receivers are broadband or wideband, excuse me, so they can capture the whole 470 to 608 range. And two of my transmitters are in the first half of that range and two are in the second half is how I split it up. But yeah, you should be able to fit two within the 470 to 495 without a problem. Okay, go ahead. Here's some good input here. To get more channels, tighter transmitter power can be too big. Quality equipment more important than power, I believe. Good point. Yeah, if you try to power it, that does funny things to wireless. So don't go crazy with power. Ken also says here, 0.300 megahertz is the default spacing when allocating space between analog wireless mics, but it decreases for better quality systems. All right. We do need to wrap it up there for today. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I hope this technically that everything came through okay. This is our first time, again, doing this 4K streaming. We're probably not going to continue to use Ecamm because it has some limitations that are driving us crazy. But we will be back next week. Get out there in the meantime, make some great sound or some great screams in particular, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care, everybody.